The research outpost on the moon of Xylos Prime wasn't exactly the Ritz. More like a glorified tin can with windows overlooking a ridiculously lush planet that looked like it had been designed by a particularly enthusiastic botanist on acid. Dr. Ben Carter, however, was not complaining. He was a xenoanthropologist, and for a guy whose idea of a wild night was cataloguing obscure mating rituals of space slugs, this was paradise. He adjusted his glasses, peering at the monitor displaying schematics of the docking bay. Today was the day. The Xylosian delegation was due, and Ben was practically vibrating with excitement. He'd spent months poring over their preliminary data packets, trying to decipher their complex social structures and, most importantly, their courtship rituals. "Okay, calm down, Ben," he muttered to himself, adjusting his lab coat and trying to smooth down his already unruly brown hair. Just another day at the office. With aliens. Who might want to mate with you, theoretically? He chuckled nervously, the absurdity of the thought momentarily overwhelming him. The comm system crackled to life. "Dr. Carter, docking bay is clear. The Xylosian shuttle is entering the bay now." It was Dr. Ramirez, his no-nonsense boss. "Try not to make a complete fool of yourself. We are being watched." "Copy that, Dr. Ramirez." Maximum professionalism engaged. Ben straightened his tie, which was slightly askew, and made his way to the docking bay with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. As he approached the airlock, the hiss of the arriving shuttle filled the air, followed by a gentle thud. The inner doors slid open with a futuristic whoosh, revealing a group of beings that looked nothing like the flat images on his monitor. They were tall, easily 7 feet, with smooth, iridescent skin that shimmered under the artificial lights of the bay. Their large, expressive eyes, like polished obsidian, scanned the room with an intensity that made Ben's throat go dry. And then there was her. Zilia. Even her name sounded exotic. She was the tallest of the group, and her skin had a subtle, swirling pattern of emerald green and gold, like a living, breathing aurora borealis. She had the most pronounced antennae-like sensory organs atop her head, which gave her face a strangely elegant look. As she stepped into the bay, her gaze locked onto Ben, and a ripple of color washed over her skin, the emerald green deepening to a vibrant jade, while the gold flared into a fiery orange, almost red. She took a step forward, her 3-fingered hand outstretched in a gesture Ben couldn't quite interpret. "Greetings, humans," she said, her voice a melodic, slightly guttural hum, which was somehow both commanding and soothing. Her lips did not move as she spoke, the sound came from a small cavity beneath her neck. "I am Zilia, representative of the Xylosian Collective." Ben, momentarily stunned by the visual spectacle, managed a clumsy bow. "Dr. Carter, a pleasure to meet you. We're honored to have you." His voice cracked slightly, and he winced internally. "Professionalism, Ben, professionalism." He cleared his throat. "I'm a xenoanthropologist, and, well, we're here to assist you in any way possible." He gestured vaguely, hoping his nervous babbling didn't come off as completely idiotic. Zilia's eyes continued to bore into his, and the color on her skin intensified, shifting into a vibrant, almost pulsating array of colors. She took another step closer, and the pheromones she was emitting hit Ben with the subtlety of a space freighter. The air around them seemed to thicken, buzzing with an alien energy that sent shivers down his spine. He felt his own heart rate accelerating, and a strange heat rose to his face. She lowered her head slightly, her antennae twitching. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice now carrying an undertone that sent a different kind of shiver down Ben's spine. "Your energy signature is intriguing. It vibrates at a frequency I find desirable." Ben's brain short-circuited. He wasn't sure what an energy signature was, but a desirable coming from a being that looked like a walking, talking, sentient lava lamp made him seriously rethink his life choices. "Right," he stammered, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Desirable, that's good." "Is that good?" "I'm sure it's good. You're all desirable as well." He laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "In a completely non-sexual, scientific way, of course. I mean, he trailed off, realizing he was making things exponentially worse. Zelia didn't seem to notice his awkwardness. In fact, she seemed to find it as amusing. Her skin shimmered even brighter, and she raised a hand, tracing the line of his jaw with a delicate finger. The touch was surprisingly light, but it sent jolts of electricity through Ben's system. "Your flesh is warm," she said, her voice a low purr. "And your skin is pale. Such a contrast. I find it stimulating." Ben swallowed hard, fighting the urge to bolt. He glanced at Dr. Ramirez, who was standing off to the side with the rest of the human crew, her face a mask of horror and barely concealed laughter. "Right," Ben managed to squeak out. "Well, shall we proceed to the briefing room? I have charts and data." Zelia tilted her head, her eye still locked on his. She glanced at her companions, and a low hum of agreement passed between them. Then she turned back to Ben, her skin now swirling with vibrant shades of orange, red, and gold. "Dr. Carter," she announced, her voice echoing through the docking bay. "I have selected you. You will be my mate for this mating season." The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate a small animal. Ben stood there, mouth agape, as the full weight of what Zelia just said crashed down on him. His eyes widened, the carefully constructed walls of his scientific professionalism crumbling into dust. He couldn't even form words, his mind a jumbled mess of what, how, and po God. He looked around the docking bay, desperately seeking some sort of salvation. But it was obvious that everyone present was either too stunned, or in the case of the human staff, too amused, to offer any help at all. The only sound in the room was the low, contented hum emanating from Zelia and her people. This was going to be one long mating season, Ben realized. And he had a sneaking suspicion that his life was about to become very, very complicated. The briefing room, usually a sanctuary of sterile scientific discussion, felt more like a pressure cooker. Ben sat at the head of the table, feeling like a cornered lab rat. The Xylosian delegation, thankfully, had been ushered to their designated quarters for a cultural adjustment period, which was really code for "let's figure out how to stop them from mounting our lead anthropologist." Dr. Ramirez, with her arms crossed and a sardonic smirk on her face, addressed the room. "So, Dr. Carter," she began, her tone laced with amusement, "care to explain how you managed to get yourself selected as a mate by a 7-foot-tall iridescent alien?" Ben ran a hand through his hair, which was now sticking up at odd angles. "It wasn't exactly a selection process," he mumbled. "More like a declaration. And the energy signature thing. I have no idea what she's talking about. I'm pretty sure my energy signature is mostly composed of lukewarm coffee and existential dread." "Well, whatever it is, it's clearly working for her," Dr. Lee, the xenobiologist, chimed in. "Based on the data we've got, their mating season is triggered by the alignment of the binary stars, and during this period, they become, well, exceptionally receptive. Especially to pheromones." And Dr. Lee added, "If I interpret the data correctly, Zelia's pheromones are off the charts. And she definitely reacted to yours, Ben." She eyed him with a knowing look. "It's like you are a walking pheromone beacon." Ben groaned, burying his face in his hands. "Great. Just great. So, what do I do? Do I wear a pheromone-blocking suit? Is there such a thing?" Dr. Ramirez chuckled. "I wish it were that simple, Ben. According to the Xylosian protocols, rejecting a mate during the mating season is considered a massive offense, almost an act of war. It's a fundamental cultural taboo. They take their physical expressions of affection very seriously." She raised an eyebrow, looking at Ben with a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. "And they are very public about it. Okay, so I can't reject her, but I also don't want to, you know." Ben trailed off, feeling a blush creeping up his neck. "Mate with her, like that." He made a vague, uncomfortable gesture in the air. "You don't actually have to, Ben," Dr. Lee said, "at least, not immediately. What she did back there is the equivalent of the Xylosians saying, 'Hey, you are hot, I would like to know you better.' You could use this as an opportunity for a cultural exchange." Just try to avoid any intimate rituals. For now. Right. Intimacy avoidance it is, Ben said, feeling only slightly more reassured. How do I even start? Do they have a getting-to-know-you phase? Or is it straight to, you know? He trailed off, again unable to actually say the words. The briefing adjourned with Ben feeling like he'd just signed a contract written in an alien language. The rest of the day was a blur of awkward encounters. Every time Ben tried to focus on his research, Zilia would appear as if from thin air, her skin swirling with vibrant colors, her large eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to simultaneously hide under a table and run to the nearest exit. He was in the hydroponics lab, checking the growth rate of the alien fungi, when Zilia appeared, gliding silently behind him. Dr. Carter, she said, her voice a low hum, her skin swirling with shades of deep purple and vibrant orange. I wish to engage in a mating ritual. Ben nearly jumped out of his skin, scattering a tray of alien seedlings across the floor. Whoa! Zilia! What kind of ritual? He asked nervously, trying to salvage the now ruined plants. The ritual of shared nectar. We combine our pheromones, and our life forces connect for a time. We learn each other's essence. It's quite beautiful, she said, her eyes gleaming with what he could only describe as anticipation. Ben's mind blanked. Nectar? I didn't bring any nectar. Is there some in the cafeteria? I'm not sure, they make a mean protein paste though, you want to try some protein paste? He rambled, trying to distract her from her intentions, and failing miserably. Zilia tilted her head, her antennae twitching. Nectar is not a thing, human. It is a concept. My essence is the nectar. She extended a hand towards him, her three-fingered hand open and waiting. Ben, flustered and confused, back away slowly. Thanks, but I'm not really feeling up for sharing essences right now. I've got a paper to write, you see. On the cultural implications of pheromone exchange. For scientific purposes. Zilia took another step, her skin now shimmering with vibrant reds and oranges. She was practically radiating heat. Your avoidance of me is confusing. Do you not find my essence pleasing? No, your essence is great. Ben said quickly, it's just, well, in my culture, we like to get to know each other a little first before, sharing bodily fluids, or, well, essences. I think of it as, a getting to know you period. Zilia stared at him for a moment, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Getting to know you? Is this some sort of courtship ritual? Well, yes, kind of. We talk, we share meals, we go to, museums. He paused, realizing how ridiculous this sounded. Or we, watch holovids. It's a whole thing. Holovids? She tilted her head again, her skin shifting to a deep blue-green, which was, Ben assumed, a sign of curiosity. What is this holovid ritual? Ben found himself explaining the basics of human pop culture to a highly advanced alien, which involved a very awkward description of a romantic comedy, which resulted in even more confusion. He tried to explain the concept of love, which, in his culture, involved a lot of emotional drama and miscommunication, while also having to fend off Zilia from initiating any essence sharing, leading to an awkward dance around the hydroponics lab. As the day dragged on, Ben found himself trapped in a cycle of trying to avoid Zilia and having to come up with increasingly absurd explanations for human social customs. He started to think that getting chosen as a mate was less of an honor and more of an elaborate, very public form of torture. And the pheromones definitely did not help. He was constantly distracted, his mind clouded with images of Zilia and her iridescent skin. That evening, as he was trying to grab a protein paste in the cafeteria, Zilia finally caught up with him. Dr. Carter, she said, her voice a low, almost desperate hum. I've attempted to engage in many getting-to-know-you rituals, but I feel my desire for your unique energy signature growing. Perhaps the holovid courtship ritual has taken too much time. I now desire to share essence with you privately. Before Ben could even utter a word, Zilia took his hand and practically dragged him away, her grip surprisingly strong. It was clear that the time for avoidance was over. They were going to the jungle. He just knew it. And he had a very bad feeling that Private for a Xylosian wasn't going to be even remotely close to what he had in mind. The jungle of Xylos Prime was, to put it mildly, overwhelming. The air was thick and humid, saturated with the scent of exotic blossoms and the low hum of unseen creatures. Giant, bioluminescent fungi cast an eerie glow, illuminating a landscape that seemed straight out of a fever dream. And there, in the middle of it all, was Ben, being practically dragged by Zilia deeper into the dense vegetation. "Zilia, wait," he called out, trying to regain his footing. "Where are we going, exactly? And are there any poisonous insects? I saw some rather large ones back at the base." Zilia didn't slow down, her grip on his hand surprisingly strong. "We go to the heart of the jungle, where the energies of Xylos are most powerful. There we can truly bond our essences and understand each other." Her skin shimmered with anticipation, the colors pulsating like a living flame. Ben gulped, his initial scientific curiosity replaced by a growing sense of panic. "Right, bonding essences. That sounds intense. Maybe we could bond over a cup of tea first? Or, I don't know, a nice book?" Zilia stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her eyes, wide and luminous, searched his. "You continue to resist, Dr. Carter. Is this part of your getting-to-know-you ritual? Are you playing a difficult game of chase?" Ben sighed. He was clearly out of his depth. "It's not a game, Zilia. It's complicated, okay? In my culture, we don't just bond essences with the first person we meet. Or, well, select as a mate. There are layers to it. There's dating, there's awkward small talk, there's the agonizing wait for a text message." Zilia tilted her head, the antennae on her forehead twitching with curiosity. "You have a process of great inefficiency. But I sense there is a meaning to it. Tell me of these layers of your courtship rituals." Ben hesitated, trying to figure out how to explain the nuances of human dating rituals to an alien who seemed to be biologically programmed to mate with him. "Well, first, you ask someone out. Then, maybe you go to a restaurant, you have a conversation, you see if you vibe, you know?" Zilia's skin shimmered with amusement. "You vibe? Is this a physical sensation? Do you synchronize your auras? Is it akin to our energy-sharing practices?" No, Ben said, feeling his face flush. "It's not like that. It's more like a feeling, a connection." He realized he was stumbling over his words. This was far more difficult than any scientific paper he had ever written. Then, Zilia continued, stepping closer to him, "Why delay the inevitable? If you are feeling a connection with me, then surely there is no reason to not share our essences. The energies are at their peak. The binary stars are in perfect alignment." Her voice deepened, becoming a low, seductive hum that resonated through his very being. Her skin shifted into a vibrant palette of reds and oranges, and Ben felt his own body reacting with alarming intensity. Before he could even form a coherent thought, Zilia pulled him into an embrace, her tall frame enveloping his. Her skin felt warm and smooth against his, and the pheromones she was emitting were intoxicating. Ben felt his heart pounding in his chest, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't sure if he was scared, aroused, or a combination of both. Zilia pressed closer, her face inches from his. "Feel the power of the jungle, Dr. Carter. Feel my essence calling to yours," she whispered, her breath warm against his cheek. Ben could feel the heat radiating from her body. He could smell her unique, exotic scent, which was both intoxicating and slightly overwhelming. He could see the swirl of colors on her skin, each shade a testament to the depth of her emotions. And strangely enough, in that moment, his fear began to fade, replaced by an unexpected and very intense feeling of, attraction. He closed his eyes, letting go of his inhibitions, surrendering to the moment. He felt Zilia's lips, which did not actually move while producing sounds, press against his, and her three-fingered hand cradling his face. The kiss was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was deep, sensual, and filled with an alien energy that seemed to resonate through his very soul. The colors on her skin deepened, and the jungle around them seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The moment was intense, almost overwhelming. Ben's mind was a whirlwind of sensory overload. He could feel Zilia's energy, her emotions, flowing through him, and it was a powerful, breathtaking experience. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just a raw, unfiltered connection that transcended words, and even species. He understood in that moment why the Xylosians were so open about their physicality, about their sensuality. It was more than just a physical act. It was communication, and intimacy, and understanding, all wrapped into one. When they finally broke apart, gasping for breath, Ben felt completely disoriented. He looked at Zilia, and for the first time, he saw past the alien features, past the iridescent skin, and the confusing mating rituals, and saw a person, someone he was actually starting to care for. And yes, someone who was extremely hot. That was, Ben began, trying to find the right words. Intense. Really intense. Zilia smiled, a gentle, almost shy expression that made her look even more beautiful. Yes, she agreed, her voice softer now. Our essences have begun to bond. It was pleasing. But I sense you are still confused by it. Is there a next step for the getting to know you ritual in this moment? Ben took a deep breath, his mind still reeling from the kiss. Yes, he said, a small smile forming on his own face. There's talking. We should talk about this. A lot. Zilia nodded, her eyes shining. Then let us talk, she said, taking his hand again. But perhaps, while we do, we can continue exploring the layers of our essences. She raised an eyebrow, a mischievous glint in her eye. Ben chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. He had come to this alien jungle expecting to study mating rituals, not to participate in them. But as he followed Zilia deeper into the heart of the jungle, he couldn't deny the unexpected thrill of it all. He was falling, and he was falling fast. And surprisingly enough, he was enjoying the ride. Maybe mating with a slutty starfish wasn't so bad after all. The return to the research outpost was awkward. Ben and Zilia walked hand in hand, well, hand in three-fingered hand, through the sterile corridors, drawing stares and whispered comments. The atmosphere was thick with a mixture of confusion, amusement, and barely concealed concern. The private ritual in the jungle had not gone unnoticed, and the consequences were now starting to ripple through the human crew. As soon as they reached the main laboratory, Dr. Ramirez cornered Ben. Her usually stoic face was a mixture of exasperation and concern. Dr. Carter, she said, her voice tight. Care to explain what exactly happened in the jungle? And don't tell me you were collecting samples of alien moss, because we all saw the way you two came in. Ben sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. It was all a misunderstanding, Dr. Ramirez. Sort of. There was bonding. Essence sharing. A lot of very complicated pheromonal activity. He winced, feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. We were, exploring cultural differences, from a very intimate perspective. Dr. Ramirez raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. Intimate? Ben, you were practically glowing. And the way she was looking at you, it's a wonder the structural integrity of this base hasn't collapsed from the sheer sexual tension. It's not like that. Ben protested weakly, although he knew, deep down, that it was, in fact, exactly like that. We were just connecting. From a cultural and a biological point of view. It was very scientific. In a way. Dr. Lee, who was leaning against a nearby console with a slightly amused look on her face, chimed in. From what the sensor readings show, it was also very pheromonally active. Zilia's readings were off the charts. You, Ben, were showing some interesting chemical changes, too. Your cortisol levels went through the roof, followed by an equally dramatic spike in dopamine. You were practically experiencing a human version of the mating season yourself. Ben groaned. Please don't analyze my emotions like they are a lab rat, you guys. I am going through a personal crisis here. This is hardly the time for a scientific investigation into my endocrine system. Well, Ben, Dr. Ramirez said, your personal crisis is now a diplomatic incident. News about your connection with Zelia has leaked. The media are already speculating about interspecies mating rituals, and our superiors are not happy. They are talking about recalling you. Ben's heart sank. Recalled? But I'm doing valuable research. We are about to make breakthrough discoveries about Xylosian social structures. And you are also about to make history as the first human to be acclaimed by an alien, Dr. Ramirez said dryly. This is going to be a PR nightmare. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of tense meetings, damage control, and frantic attempts to explain the intricacies of Xylosian mating rituals to increasingly bewildered higher-ups. Ben found himself constantly having to defend his actions, arguing that it was a cultural exchange, not some sort of interspecies love affair, although, deep down, he wasn't sure if he actually believed that. Meanwhile, Zelia seemed completely unfazed by the human drama. She continued to pursue Ben with a single-mindedness that was both endearing and terrifying. She would appear in his lab, during video calls with headquarters, even during meal times, her skin shimmering with vibrant colors and her eyes filled with an obvious affection that made Ben's heart both flutter and skip a beat. Dr. Carter, she said, joining him in the cafeteria while he was trying to eat a tasteless protein paste. I have been observing human eating rituals. It is a curious process. But we could share a meal using that essence sharing method. It would be more efficient and surely more enjoyable. Ben choked on his paste. Zelia, he said, trying to keep his voice down. We can't just share essences in the cafeteria. There are other people here. Human people. They don't understand. Zelia tilted her head, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. But you said we were connecting. Is the connection not to be shared publicly? Do humans hide their feelings? Well, yes, sometimes, Ben admitted. We have this thing called modesty. It's complicated. He sighed, feeling the weight of cultural differences crashing down on him. We also need to have a talk about the public and a private. Xylosian culture needs to understand that human modesty can be described as extreme. Zelia's skin shifted to a deep blue, which, Ben had learned, was a sign of contemplation. This modesty is a strange concept. If an emotion is felt, why hide it? It is like locking up the most beautiful, most vibrant part of your energy. Well, that's how we do it. We tend to keep our intimate feelings private until we are absolutely sure it is appropriate to share them, Ben explained. It's about respect and boundaries, and not making other people feel uncomfortable. But should the sharing of feelings cause discomfort if they are true and genuine? Zelia asked with a surprisingly honest curiosity. I see the humans struggling to understand why we share every single feeling, but is it right to suppress them? Ben paused, pondering over her words. He had never really thought about it in this way. It was actually Zelia who had made him understand that human culture is a mess of contradictory concepts. It was a bizarre reversal of roles. Later that night, Ben was in his quarters, trying to make sense of the situation when Zelia appeared at his door, unannounced. Dr. Carter, she said, her voice soft. The media is asking many questions. The humans here are confused. I believe I understand a new layer of your courtship rituals. Perhaps we should communicate our feelings, not only with our essences, but with your words. And in private. This modesty, I must admit, is growing on me as a new fascinating ritual. Ben sighed, feeling the exhaustion creeping in. He realized that his life had turned into a complicated dance between cultural expectations, scientific discoveries, and a very, very intense alien love interest. And somehow, he had a feeling that this was only the beginning. The formal inquiry was as sterile and emotionless as Ben had expected. The holographic room, with its bland grey walls and uncomfortable chairs, felt like a particularly dull torture chamber. The faces of his superiors, projected on the main screen, were stern and judgmental. They had clearly made up their minds about him and his inappropriate behavior. Dr. Carter, the lead administrator, a stern-looking woman named Director Vance, began, her voice echoing through the room. Your actions have caused significant diplomatic and public relations concerns. Your relationship with the Xylosian representative is unprofessional and compromises the integrity of this research mission. Ben sat up straight, trying to maintain his composure. With all due respect, Director Vance, I believe my relationship with Xillia has actually enhanced our understanding of Xylosian culture. We are learning about their social structures, their mating rituals, and their way of life in a way that would never be possible without this personal connection. He paused, taking a deep breath. And, if I may be so bold, I believe there's nothing wrong with two intelligent beings of different species forging a genuine, meaningful connection, regardless of their biological differences. Meaningful connection, another administrator scoffed. Dr. Carter, you've been engaging in public displays of affection, not scientific discourse. The images are all over the galactic net. You are being called the human pheromone magnet and the slutty starfish mate and many other, less flattering names. Ben felt a flush rise to his cheeks, but he forced himself to stay calm. Those are sensationalist headlines. The reality is far more complex. Xillia and I are learning from each other. We are building bridges between our cultures, not just engaging in whatever it is the media is portraying. And what exactly are you teaching her about human culture, Dr. Carter? Director Vance asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The intricacies of protein paste? The beauty of holovids? Or the best way to publicly engage in interspecies mating? Ben sighed. I am also teaching her about our struggles with expressing our feelings and emotions. I am teaching her that while we might hide our true intentions behind closed doors, that doesn't always mean we are being genuine. I am showing her our good and our bad sides, and she is doing the same in return. He locked eyes with the holographic projection of the director. I do not believe that the diversity of love is something we should hide or be ashamed of, in any culture, and in any species. That might be poetic, Dr. Carter, but it's hardly professional, Director Vance said coldly. You are being recalled to Earth. The Xylosian delegation will be handed over to a new team that will focus on science and not whatever you are doing here. Ben's heart sank. He knew that if he returned to Earth, he would probably never see Xillia again. And that was a prospect he found increasingly unbearable. I understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But before I leave, I would like to say one thing. He took a deep breath, summoning all the courage he could muster. I, Dr. Ben Carter, human, xenoanthropologist, choose to remain here. I choose to continue my research and to continue my connection with Xillia. I choose love and learning over everything else. The silence that followed was heavy. The administrators were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. You are making a serious mistake, Dr. Carter, Director Vance said, her voice tight. Perhaps, Ben said with a shrug. But it's my mistake to make. With that, he stood up and left the holographic room, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just thrown his entire career away, and somehow, he didn't regret it one bit. He found Xillia waiting for him outside the main laboratory, her skin shimmering with a myriad of colors. Dr. Carter, she said, her voice soft. I felt your emotions. The humans are attempting to separate us. Ben took her hand, feeling a surge of warmth flow through him. They are Xillia. But I will not let them. He met her gaze, his eyes filled with an intensity that mirrored her own. I choose you, Xillia. I choose us. No matter what. Xillia's skin shifted to a radiant gold, a color that Ben had learned was her equivalent of joy. Then we shall face this challenge together, my chosen mate, she said, her voice filled with determination. And maybe, we shall also teach the humans a new way to see love, in all its infinite, beautiful forms. They walked hand in hand towards the main communication array, where Ben delivered a passionate, impromptu speech about the importance of understanding, acceptance, and love to both the human and Xylosian governments. He spoke about the beauty of cultural exchange, the joy of overcoming differences, and the power of embracing the unknown. Xylia stood by his side, her presence a silent testament to the power of their connection. The Xylosian government, it turned out, was surprisingly accepting. They had a deep respect for personal choice and were quite pleased that one of their own had found a mate that was obviously compatible on so many levels. They saw the cultural exchange that Ben was referring to as a great opportunity to learn about human culture, as well as the importance of showing your true feelings, even if that meant doing it very publicly. And they were extremely happy that their sluttiest starfish had finally found a partner that was able to keep up with her. The human government, while still apprehensive, was forced to acknowledge the unexpected positive public reaction to the whole ordeal. The media frenzy had transformed into a positive story about love, acceptance, and interspecies cooperation. And so, Ben was allowed to remain on Xylos Prime, not as a recalled scientist, but as an ambassador, and, more importantly, as Xylia's mate. As the binary stars aligned once again, their glow illuminating the lush landscape of Xylos Prime, Ben and Xylia stood together, their hands clasped tightly. They had faced challenges, overcome cultural differences, and found love in the most unexpected of places. Their journey was far from over, but they had learned that the true magic lies not in the stars, but in the hearts that dared to connect, regardless of species, culture, or expectations. And as he looked into Xylia's radiant eyes, Ben knew that this was only the beginning of their great, strange, and wonderfully absurd adventure together. And he wouldn't have it any other way.